our first episode of our Poro Farms Live. And for today, we have two very special guests. We have Mike McCloskey from the United States, and we have Thorsten Hem from Germany. I think that Thorsten was kicked out. We're going to give it a couple of seconds. But before we start, I'm Francisco Rodriguez, and I'm going to be your host for today. It is 7 a.m. Central Standard Time in the United States. It is 4 p.m. in Dubai, in the Middle East, and then it's 7 p.m. in Jakarta, in Africa. And here we are to talk about some of the most important or relevant topics around the food safety and food production scenario today, which is the tropical dairy farming revolution. So for that, I'd like to introduce our guests. So first, I'd like to start with Thorsten. Thorsten is a dairy expert. He was the founder of the very well known IFCN, the International Federation Corporation Network. And today, Thorsten is member of different entities and consulting within the global network for dairy farming. And a very interesting fact from Thorsten, he is the 19th generation dairy farmer in Germany, which means the tax information from his farm and his family date back to the 1538, which means almost 400 or 500, I don't know, but he's used hundreds of years of history in the dairy farming and started with 5 cows. So, Thorsten, thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Also, I'd like to introduce Mike McCloskey. Mike is a veterinarian, was, uh, was born and raised in the United States, Puerto Rico, Mexico. So he's a truly international entrepreneur and veterinarian, friend, partner, and a person that really knows passion on how dairy farming becomes a sustainable business and how we can build a dairy farm of the future. So thank you very much, Mike, for joining us this morning, and thank you very much for embracing the tropical dairy farming revolution because you have been a visionary for many years for the tempered crystal kind of dairy farming, and today you are now an inspiration for many of us on the tropical dairy farming scene or revolution as well. So thank you very much, Mike, for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Francisco. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So for this morning, our objective is to share with people around the world what tropical dairy farming is. And to do that, we will split this conversation into three different chapters. The first one is the why, the second is how, and the third is what it is. What is it? So to begin with, we'll talk about why the tropical dairy farming revolution is so relevant nowadays in the conversations about food safety, food production in terms of milk production. So Thorsten, what what would you like to share with us this morning about the why?
Yes. No, tropical dairy farming is so important because most of the future dairy demand will come out of developing countries, and most developing countries are located in tropical or subtropical regions. Just to give you an example, why is the dairy demand so strong growing in these regions? Population growth is happening in this part of the world, number one. Number two, per capita consumption is growing. At the moment, incomes is low, per capita consumption is low, and we expect future prosperity in these regions, which will drive more people and people drinking more milk. And to have a practical example for you, an average person in Nigeria is consuming per year 10 liters of milk or dairy. An average American or European person is consuming 300. So that means you can see there's a growth potential in per capita demand of at least 10, 20, 30 times. So why is tropical dairy farming so important? Demand is growing and supply is probably not able to fill the gap at the moment. And for some of the, I found one number also quite interesting. In US, we did a breakdown on the self-sufficiency of milk. California, Wisconsin have surplus of milk. Florida doesn't produce all the milk they need. So the self-sufficiency of Florida as a tropical country is 25%. 25% local milk, 75% imported from other parts of the US. So what does it mean? At the moment, if tropical dairy farming is not developing, we have less milk to feed the people, and we have less potential to support rural areas and farmers to develop their business and income.
Excellent, Thorsten. When we look at the amount of cows that are in the tropical countries, we see that commercial cows, perhaps 60%, if not more, of the cows around the world are located in these countries. At the same time, they contribute with way less protein and with way less milk than the countries that are in temperate climates. Why would you think that producers have been for so long lagging or lacking productivity, and what is the issue about that?
Well, I have a theory and on dairy development. In most of the tropical countries, and especially once they are very poor, we grow milk production by adding more farms in, doing the same what these farms and countries have done with dairy the last 1,000 years. So, why is not that much dairy development happening? Because economic prosperity is not kicking in. So at a certain point, and you see that in some countries where we say, well, I would define there's a trigger point. There's a trigger point which is facilitating from the old dairy development model, more farms doing the same, putting 2-3 cows in the backyard, moving to less farms, larger farms, farms with higher yields. And if you draw a development curve, there are a number of countries which are beyond the turning point. Some of them have not reached the turning point. But if we better understand that system, and if a country has passed the turning point, we will start to see a dairy development like we probably have seen in Europe, in the United States, and China.
Excellent, Thorsten. Mike, why do you think the tropical dairy farming revolution is so important for the world?
So, I had my experience in Mexico back in the 70s. I studied veterinary medicine at the University of Mexico. And part of my final years at school, my thesis was on tropical dairy. And obviously back then, all we had was insemination and obviously bulls. And we were using Gujarat or different types of Brahma cattle and crossing them with Holsteins and getting some excellent cattle, F1s. But obviously, as we went into second and third crosses, we would lose either the ability to sustain the challenges of the tropic or the ability to produce that came from the Holstein breed. So, but it was very obvious to me at that young age that if you had the right type of feed and you could keep the right type of genetics, that tropical dairy production was something that could be quite impressive and quite productive as compared to the more temperate climates in the northern and southern regions of the globe. So my career took me into the United States, got very involved in intense dairy management, very large. So it's how I spent the majority of my career. But my heart, because I was raised in Puerto Rico and trained in the tropics in Mexico, my heart was always with the thought process of what Thorsten and what you've said, that the tropics is the most productive area of the world, in my opinion. Unfortunately, it's not being utilized as such. We have, as you all mentioned, some of the highest concentration of dairy, of cattle in general, are in the tropics, with only 30% of the productivity, while 70% of the productivity is coming out of non-tropical countries. So, with obviously, 30 or 40% of the cattle. So, the beauty over the years is the transformation in genetics, both in our pastures. Back when I was young in Puerto Rico, our best pasture were pangolas. You know, those pangolas average probably 6% protein. Estrella was a very good pasture, very well managed. You could hit 12% back then. Today, with different types of bracallas and other pastures that have been developed, and even improvements on the existing two that I said, we're seeing levels of protein of 18%. Now, we all know that alfalfa is the queen of all pastures, and good quality alfalfa, we know we can run in that 22 to 24%. But that's not a product that we can use in the tropics. But when you can get 365 days a year in the tropics of pasture production that well managed, well rotated, well fertilized, well taken care of, well irrigated if necessary, that you can average 18% protein, now you're starting to really have something. And when you can have a cattle today that through F1s, receiving F1 embryos, you can maintain a pure F1 herd, depending on what breeds or however you decide to do that. I'm not going to get into specific breeds. We know that the most popular one is an F1 cross between a Holstein and a Gyr. There's others. Now we're finding slick genes that we ignored for many years. Puerto Rico was a king of slick genes, and we ignored them for many, many years. Now we're really understanding slick genes. It's moving very rapidly into our Holstein population. I will venture to say that in the next 10 years, I don't think there'll be a top bull that will not carry the slick gene. I think it's that important because even in our northern climates and southern climates, the heat is getting so bad. This summer up in the Midwest has been an incredible example this June, where we've lost tremendous productivity in our cattle. So this slick gene, although developed in the tropics, it will move itself into cattle all over the world, in my opinion, because of the increased heat that we expect over the next 30 years. But going back to the tropics, to me, there's several things. I think one is cultural, and it's just the reality. I'm Latin, so I can take the liberty of saying that it is cultural. We take things a little easier when you have when you don't have a winter coming at you where you got to prepare and work hard in the short months you have to work, and all year round there's productivity. It's a little easier mentality. The culture is not there. As Tirsten said, there are those breakthrough people within every region of Latin America that are starting to break through and demonstrating great dairy farms today. I've been in many that I'm very, very impressed, where they are using the crossbreeding, where they are using intense pasture management and pasture rotation at the right time, making sure that those cattle are in there when that plant is at its highest level of productivity. By that I mean it at its higher digestibility, its higher level of protein, keeping them there the proper amount of time and moving them to the next pasture, giving whatever days, say it be a 28-day rotation or whatever those days are needed for the particular type of species of pasture they may be using. All these things are coming to life now, and will start to grow. And instead of doing, as was mentioned, what my neighbor did for 200 years, now people are starting to look at those leaders that have developed, especially in Latin America, and looking at them and seeing cattle that are producing 22 liters and 24 liters under these conditions. And they will be the trendsetters that everyone will follow from now on. So there's going to be a revolution and an explosion in tropical dairy production over the next 20 years. It's going to be very impressive at its best. Is it going to be all pasture rotation? Will it be bed packs? Will it be it will be a combination of things, just like in the States. Some guys like open corrals, others like freestalls, some people like a rotary barn, others like a robotic. So nothing will be a cookie cutter. And every region will adapt a little bit different, and there'll be varieties within those regions. But there'll be tremendous leadership and tremendous productivity that's going to come out of all of this evolution that I saw back in the 70s, where we were so rustic in our tropical dairy cattle, which truly was 2 or 3 cows in your backyard, the calf nursing on the cow, milking a liter or 2 after that and selling that, to something that really is going to impact the food production in the world in a very positive way.
Excellent, Mike. So the potential has been always there. We have humidity, we have temperature, we have land, we have people, we have had all the resources, but we were lacking was really the genetics from the bovine side and from the pasture side. And of course, now with this systematic approach. And I think that is yesterday when we were having a conversation with Torsten. Torsten, you mentioned something that really resonated with me, which was the systematic approach. Because in the past, there were cows in the tropics. It was not that there were no cows. There is millions of cows. In fact, there are more cows living in the tropics than any other place. An example of that is India, a country that today milks more than 100 million animals between water buffaloes and cows, but where perhaps the average milk production per animal is 2 to 3 liters compared to the 38 or 35 liters in the United States. So if the potential is there and the technological package that Brazil put it together, because the reality is we have to give credit where credit is due, and Brazil played a fundamental role when they brought the germplasm from India. Then they put together the pastures, and then they created this embryo system where they created a perennial genetic package where they made it possible to milk with a 50% indicus, 50% taurus, create an animal that could really thrive in this environment. Now, if the potential is there and the tools are there, how do we take it from being a vision or a dream to being a reality based on your experience and based on the research that you have done?
Well, in my IFCN time, we have evaluated farming systems. So you have a 2-cow farming system, 5-cow farming system, 20 cow, 200 cow, grazing, not grazing, 2,000 cow. You have systems all over the world. And what we did was to evaluate the economic performances of these systems, because at a certain level on the product market, these systems compete with each other. So once you are on the competitive side, you can produce milk below the expected future milk price. You have a competitive system. You can pay your salaries, you can pay your loans, you can grow your farm. So what makes a system competitive, or what makes it?
Okay, so we had Torsten should be back in a few seconds, but what we observe globally, of course, is that a lot of these tropical dairy farms. Hey, there is Torsten back.
I'm sorry, something is wrong here in Sweden with my internet. So
no problem. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you to have a future-proven farming system, it's not rocket science, but you need to pick.
Oh, his internet is going back again. So, Mike, what are your thoughts on, now waiting for Torsten? What are your thoughts on how do we take it from the vision where we have the tools? How do we make it happen? I think you're muted, Mike. I cannot hear you, Mike. Torsten, you're back?
I'm back. Sorry for that one.
No problem.
Yes. So most people who take care about dairy development on a farm or region are not really looking on that on a systematic approach, and not looking too much on a strategic approach, and not looking too much on a business sense approach for on that one. And if we can strengthen these aspects, and let's look about sports, right? If you want to win the World Cup in football, you need to put the team together, and you need to have the player on the field, and you need to have the support staff and the system around that one. And I promise you, if that happens in the specific regions, this region will win. It doesn't happen that often, but once it happens, there's a huge opportunity.
Excellent, Thorsten. So what are the key success factors that today a dairy farmer in the tropics should consider in order to become a sustainable farm for the future?
First of all, I think you need to define the milk price on which what is your future milk price in that region. And that is usually very much linked with the world market prices, unless you are a tariff protected country. So that's number one. You need to have that price. Number two, if I listen to Mike, it's about feeding, genetics, and so on, putting a barn system, labor system, milking system, putting a system together which is allowing you to produce milk below production costs. And you need to evaluate different systems to get to that level. And then you need a good processor which is operating with you, and then you need capital.
Excellent, Thorsten. Mike, we can hear you now.
Yes.
So
sorry about that.
No problem. So what would you consider are the critical success factors to take us from a vision to reality?
Yeah, like I was saying, a lot will happen organically, and it's going to be a truly country by country, region by region scenario. Unfortunately, I feel that in many parts of the tropics, where we're still very rustic in the way we're operating, to catch up, you need to be able to create a market, because it just doesn't work if you don't have a hub that can receive the milk, process it, and get it to the marketplace in a way that is economical. And unfortunately, and I have nothing against aid. I am a big supporter of aid, but many times aid comes in at a lesser price than what the local producer can produce, which then sets back that growth, that organic growth we're talking about. So in some areas, you're going to have to set up systems that are going to have to be government, NGO, other institutional setups, where you create the critical infrastructure that then allows for the growth of an industry. And like I said, in different regions of the world, and you mentioned Brazil and others, they will do that organically and do it very well. So it's going to be a combination for certain countries that are going to need other intervention other than an organic growth at this stage, just because we're so globalized, although today it doesn't feel that way for other political reasons that we're not going to get into. But we are so globalized, and powder moves around the world at such an incredibly inexpensive price that many times you look at cost of production at a local level, and because it's inefficient yet and it needs to grow into efficiency, it can never break through that barrier unless there is an infrastructure put around it, education put around it, economic support put around it, to allow it to start developing. And once you get it going, it will be as competitive as any other price in the world, because these are areas where you can produce milk at a very competitive price, but you can't break through that barrier that is so large between the inefficiency as compared to the globalization of products that are moving around the world. And that's a big concern of mine when I look at the world, I look at the tropics, and I look at the development we're going to talk about. It will take many of these great institutions such as the Rockefeller Foundation, the Gates Foundation, other wealthy organizations, government, and professionals that understand what we're talking about, working together in different regions to be able to truly kick areas like that into a higher productive level.
Excellent, Mike. Based on what Mike is saying, Thorsten, and with all the wealth of experience that you have around the world, if you were to start a tropical dairy farm today, if you were an investor, where would you go, and what parts of the world you find very interesting for tropical dairy farming?
Well, I think there are um, different aspects. The first thing what I would do is I would develop large farms around mega cities serving local market with an on-farm branded product. So that happens already in some areas, and there's a certain segment of consumers who like to pay a price premium for local milk, fresh milk, and a certain image of that milk. And I think there's a certain market in India, so you see some farms like that. But I think there's a market for all mega cities around the world in the tropics. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is once in rural areas. Usually, I would start in tropical countries on altitude. So if I'm developing dairy in tropical countries, I would start with altitude first, because with altitude I move a little bit into temperate climate zones on that one. Because at the moment the systems we have are fitted, the cows, the farm, and all systems are much better fitting for temperate climate than still tropical climate. So that's my second part. The third part is I would look for people who are connecting the dots, system thinkers, to develop the tropical dairy system. So if I follow Mike's argument, if you have the forage in quantity and quality, if we have the heat tolerant cattle on that, if you have a processor, if we are competitive against imports on that one, that's the third pillar where I would start at the moment.
There is a really nice case of what you just mentioned, and it's very close to me with me being Colombian. Colombia milks 4 million cows, of which 1 million are in the high altitude, 9,000 feet or 2,600 meters above the sea level. Those cows are Holstein jerseys that are grazing 365 days a year. They rotate in ryegrasses and Penicetum clandestinum every 35 to 40 days. And then what happened was in the last 15 years, when people start traveling to Brazil and seeing the tropical dairy revolution in Brazil, they said, hey, we are farming in the altitude where land is so costly because people want to live where 16 degrees Celsius every single day. They don't want to live at 40 degrees Celsius every single day. So most of the cities in countries like Colombia are in the high altitudes. And I'd say 90% of the population is at 2000, is above the 2,000 meters of altitude. But what happened was the pressure of the cities started putting more cost on land, and that the dairy farmers were losing profitability. And when they went to Brazil, they said, well, now we need to use the tropics. And now what you see is 9 out of every 10 projects, new projects in a country like Colombia, happen at sea level or perhaps below 1,000 meters above sea level. Why? Because now people are looking to remain profitable. And what's happening is once you learn how to graze animals in high altitude with Holsteins or Jerseys, maybe at 25 kilos of milk per day, then you go to the tropics, you implement the same technological package. And what ends up happening is now you have a process where you go from high altitude to low altitude, and the only difference is you go from milking a black and white Holstein to milking a black and white Girolando, and this when biotechnology has really become an enabler. So Colombia is a really nice case because the other 3 million cows are based on the tropics. That doesn't count the beef cows that are milked in the tropics that raise a calf and they milk one teat, that they milk one quarter. And
Yeah.
the dual purpose system in the tropics is very common. Whether you are in India, whether you are in Colombia or south of Mexico, there is still a lot of Brahman crosses or Gujarat that they have the calf with the mother, they milk one quarter, and that's what they ship for cash flow purposes. Well, some of those farmers are saying, well, now I can have a high intensity specialized dairy farm that is running 500, 400 Girolandos, that is producing 40,000 kilos per hectare per year. Those cows are making 18 to 20 kilos per cow per day, but they produce at a way lower cost than they produce in the high altitudes. To give you an idea, Torsten and Mike, in a dairy farm in Colombia in the altitude, you can expect a margin or an EBITDA of around 18%. When you are in the tropics, we have farms that are running 40% EBITDA today. And examples of that is La Facenda, for example. They milk 1,200 Girolandos in the eastern plains of Colombia, and they see EBITDAs of 40, 43%. That you never see in the high altitudes. And I'm not sure if that's something you can see in other places. There is another very interesting topic in the tropics, which is circular economy. How do we integrate grain production with pork production, and then how you use the organic matter to put into the pastures, and then cows become a byproduct, so that you can use those grasses that are fertilized with the pork organic matter. So at the end of the day, what we can create in the tropics is such an agricultural machine that integrates high intensity agriculture, integrates other species like pork, chicken, and then you can integrate dairy farming. And at the end of the day, what we see is these mega units that produce so much animal protein for the world. And I think that's something that the tropics are seeing. So we see the small farmer with 5 to 10 cows. We see the large farmer that comes with the mentality of, I'm a dairy farmer. I came from another country. I came from the high altitude, and I'm going to milk my 500, 1,000 animals. But then we also see these mega animal protein production units that are saying, you know what? If we're going to do it, we do it at a large scale, and we're going to use every single product there is of every one of the subsystems to create a high profitability, high productivity animal protein machine. And that is what we see in Southeast Asia by Arab-owned companies. That's what we see in Latin America by Latin American-owned entities. But it's not black or white. It's different combinations that we can have. How it looks like? There is two production systems, and I'd like to pick your brain on what you think will be predominant, or in which cases we will go for one or the other. Is it grazing systems that is going to be predominant in the tropics? Or are we going to go back to the California development where we will all end up with free stalls or bed packs? How do you guys see that trend going forward?
I guess I would say that the deeper, tougher tropical areas, you will depend more on the genetic revolution that we're going through right now, and you'll be on pasture areas. As you get a little altitude and relief from that intense tropics, you'll see more of the bed packing system. Which you get back into all the costs that I would love to get away with, and like in our projects in Puerto Rico, where we would be intense pasture management and get away from all the silages and all the work that we have to do all year round to be able to, and the equipment and the cost of feeding those cows. So when you talk about that 40% productivity in La Facenda, it's because they have, reduced substantially those type of costs and have gone to a cattle that can, take care of itself on pasture. Although they do some feeding outside of the barn, as you know, which I think everyone should in those type of combinations. So I see a tropical pasture combination with a supplement feed on the way out of the barn. And in very strong tropical areas. And again, then I see more of a bed pack in places like Brazil. Many of the areas that they're subtropical, as you know. I see them more moving towards a bed pack and productivity, and more farming and silage and delivering the feed to the cow.
Excellent, Mike. Torsten.
Yes, the question is good, but it's an either-or question, and we have been living too long in an either-or world, and we need to move out of dogmatic concepts. We need to move to agile concepts, and we need to understand when a system or region reach a trigger point to move more to confined or back to grazing, more to from dual purpose animal to pure dairy, versus pure dairy maybe back to dual purpose cattle and so on. So um, I, I fully agree what Mike said on a technical side, but the mentality is, I've been discussing and listening to so many farmers, and most of the case we discuss farming systems similar like colors of tractors, and that maybe a green tractor is better than a blue tractor. And do you know the movie Moneyball? The baseball team who put mathematics into getting the best team together. Do you
Yeah.
know that movie?
No,
Yes.
I haven't seen it.
Mike, you know that one, right?
Yeah. Yes. Very well. Yes.
So I would recommend people to a lot of in dairy, most people are in the old style putting a baseball team together by feeling, saying, I think this is a good player, I know this is a good player. And then I think it was Brad Pitt as a trainer coming in, and the mathematical guy, and saying, okay, put what's the probability of that guy making it to base, and then he puts the team together based on mathematical principles. And I think now and all football teams have such a guy in there to optimize the system. So that's the second point. The third point is we did some interesting studies in Ireland on what is better, confined or pure grazing. And what we came up with, it was the system the farmer could manage best.
There.
So it's a system has some advantages, but the farmer itself, there's maybe a farmer who can manage confined but not grazing. Then he's probably until a certain point he's good in confined, and then that farmer he's good in grazing. He might be better to stay in grazing. So the skill set of the farmer is a variable in this function.
Very, very well said. Very well said. I agree 100% with that.
Excellent. So, based on that, Thorsten, we see that the tropic is very flexible. It's not black and white. One day it rains, the next day is super high temperature and humidity. What we're proposing is flexibility is the name of the game. We invite people not to think black or white, but let's put all the variables on the table. Let's put all the ingredients on the table. Let's create our own recipe, and then let's run that recipe to create and serve the best food, because maybe what works for one won't work for the other. And as it has a lot of variables like altitude, temperature, breeds, confinement, grazing, is as a farmer really putting the pieces together in a systematic approach, and maybe getting closer to this to those influencers or those guys with the systematic approach, because that perhaps is what we need, is those people that can really do the paradigm shift and help others organize those thought processes, which if in confinement it requires knowledge, in the tropics it requires a lot to put all the pieces together, just because of the amount of variables that we just discussed this morning. And of course, recognizing that tropical dairy farming is different than traditional dairy farming, and the tools are here to work, and the tools are here to produce and configure those tropical production systems. We need to take advantage of grass genetics, and I really would like to invite people to visit CIAT, the Center for Tropical Agriculture. Those guys do an amazing job on developing tropical grasses, improving genetics, because I like to leave people with some tools that when we finish this call or this webinar, people can say, hey, where should I go? First, I really encourage people to go to CIAT, look at the amount of research that has been done in tropical grasses, and it's just amazing what we can find there. And everything starts with nutrition, everything starts with the soil. Then I recommend people to go and study what Brazil has done with the Girolando, and how Girolando has changed tropical production. Today, 80% of the milk produced in Brazil is produced out of these production systems. And yes, a lot of people are going towards bed packs, but they are doing it also based on those genetics. I also encourage people to go and study about the sleek gene, because that's also another tool that is coming up to the tropics. And of course, when we put together these different aspects of nutrition, we put these different aspects of genetics, then now we can talk about how we make it happen. And of course, through Foro Farms Live, we will be sharing a lot of this knowledge and transferring this knowledge so that we can make this revolution happen, as Mike says, for the next 20 years. So, closing, Thorsten, Mike, what's a message that you would like to leave with people around the world, and yeah, how we encourage young dairy farmers and existing dairy producers to really look at different and take advantage of this opportunity?
Well, I would say you need a fitting system and you need trust. So, so to find the fitting farming system, combining being competitive on that location is a huge piece of work, and so on and so on. And
Oh, we lost Thorsten. Mike.
Well, I think you summarized it very well, Francisco. It's about knowledge first before anything. It's about, what works in your area, understanding very well those in your area who have been successful, to be able to go and learn and share with them. This is something that dairy farmers have done forever. Is to they're very, very nice about sharing their knowledge and their experience. So I recommend always to travel, quite a bit within your region, get to know those who are more successful, listen to them, learn from them, make a plan, do your research as you explained about CIAT. I mean, that is just a phenomenal wealth of knowledge. Everything that is occurring on the genetic side of cattle for the tropics is a wealth of knowledge out there to understand that well. And to be able to sit and structure themselves way before they start, have a really good idea of, after doing a lot of research and a lot of study, of where they should go. And then I like the idea of a little bit of trial and error. So I would like to start a little small and try things, make sure that they work right, make sure that I understand them well, and then kind of grow them from there.
Excellent, Mike. Thorsten, you're back.
yes, sorry. Yes, we need the right system. We can get there by watching the most talented entrepreneurs in the region, but we also can speed up the process. Here, my recommendation is to use the concept of the Moneyball movie in baseball. So there are tools to put a strategic team in a region together and do these trials, and don't rely only on the individual farmer taking all the investment and the costs on it. Number one. Number two is, if you have it, you need people trusting in it to scale it up. So you need farmers trusting in it to go in that direction. You need processors building processing facilities in that region because they know they get the competitive milk, and you need the bankers and in there providing the capital. So system number one, trust number two, and with the trust you get the farmers investing, the processor one willing to invest, and the banks financing the whole thing, and then you get a big change on scale. And the region who is doing that first might have a big chance to win.
Excellent, Thorsten. And I'd like to say that the three of us have something in common. We are committed and we have a passion for tropical dairy farming. So I'd like to leave you guys with an invitation, and many other people. Perhaps we need to create a chapter for tropical dairy farming within the Global Dairy Network, Thorsten and Mike, because it's only because we are influencers and we're people that have that systematic approach in different parts of the world. But when I travel, I don't see people in different parts of the world connecting the dots. What made milk production in China successful or in the Middle East were those consultants from the US, the Netherlands, or the UK traveling to those countries and teaching people how to do things. And now we see farms so productive in many places, but that happened over a period of many years with the commitment and the transfer knowledge. I don't see that same thing in the tropics, and there is the opportunity. How we together start going to those countries, sharing the knowledge, creating those circles of excellence, and really helping them thriving through example. So that's an invitation that I would like to leave with you. That's an invitation that I would like to leave with those that are here on this morning in this live, because it's by only sharing, uniting, and spending time with sharing these successful cases that we will make a difference. So let's start from the basics, from sharing the knowledge. All right. So thank you very much, Mike. Thank you very much, Thorsten. It was a pleasure to be with you this morning. Thanks, everybody, for joining us from different parts of the world. And next time, we will see you to talk about a very interesting topic, the topic of the role of dairy gear in the tropical dairy farming revolution. Have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.